The night was quiet. But inside that silence, something ugly was brewing. A black family stood outside a modest apartment building, holding boxes of their belongings. They had just driven across town, kids half asleep in the back seat, hopeful for a fresh start. But what should have been the beginning of a new chapter turned into a cold reminder of the walls built against them. Because when the landlord saw their faces, his words cut deeper than any locked door. "I don't rent to people like you." And just like that, their home was stolen before they even stepped inside. Now picture this. The city was moving forward, new developments, shiny apartments, promises of equality. But beneath that surface, old scars were still bleeding. The local news would later describe this neighborhood as peaceful, diverse, and growing. But the family knew the truth. Peaceful? Until you tried to claim space. Diverse? Until you demanded respect. The father, Marcus, held his daughter's hand tightly that night. Her tiny voice asked, "Daddy, why can't we go inside? Is it not our house anymore?" And Marcus couldn't answer. Because how do you explain hate to a child? Marcus Johnson was no stranger to struggle. He worked double shifts at the factory, hands blistered, back breaking, just to keep food on the table. His wife, Tasha, was the anchor of the family. Strong-willed, sharp, and protective. She taught her kids to speak with confidence, even in a world that wanted them silent. Neighbors loved them. The kids laughed loudly, played fairly, and dreamed big. But authority? That's where Marcus always felt the sting. Ignored at the bank. Dismissed at job interviews. And now, denied a home. It wasn't just rejection. It was humiliation. And for a man who spent his life trying to prove he belonged, this felt like a wound he couldn't hide. Word spread fast. Some neighbors whispered, "That landlord's always been like that." Others turned away, afraid to get involved. But a few were furious. Because everyone knew. This wasn't the first time. Marcus and Tasha tried to file a complaint. But the clerk at the housing office smirked, telling them, "You'll need real evidence, or it's just your word against his." And right there, the system failed them. But this family wasn't ready to disappear into silence. Not this time. Here's the twist. The very landlord who slammed the door on Marcus's family was a respected church deacon. That's right. Every Sunday, he stood at the pulpit, shaking hands, preaching kindness, collecting offerings. To the community, he was a man of God. But behind closed doors, he played gatekeeper of who was worthy to live under his roof. And when Marcus discovered this, the fury inside him boiled into something unshakable. Because now, it wasn't just about a home. It was about exposing a man hiding behind holy words. The family found an ally. A young civil rights lawyer named Danielle Price. She knew the law. She knew the history. And most importantly, she knew the fight. With her help, they filed a housing discrimination lawsuit. Suddenly, the landlord who thought he was untouchable was being dragged into the light. The courtroom was tense. Marcus sat beside his wife, hands trembling but spirit unbroken. The landlord walked in with arrogance, Bible tucked under his arm. But when witnesses began speaking, neighbors, former tenants, people he had also rejected, the mask cracked. One by one, the stories lined up. Patterns emerged. And the truth became undeniable. When the judge finally spoke, the silence in that room could have broken glass. "This court finds the defendant guilty of housing discrimination. The Johnson family is awarded damages and the right to the apartment they were denied." Gasps echoed. Tasha cried openly. Marcus closed his eyes, whispering thanks under his breath. Justice, at last. But here's the question, family. Did justice truly win? Because while the Johnsons gained their home, the scars of that night never left. Their daughter still asked, "Daddy, why didn't he want us?" And Marcus knew. For every case they fought and won, there were hundreds left in silence. So yes, the landlord was exposed. But the system that allowed him to thrive? Still standing. And that leaves us wondering, how many more families tonight are standing outside a locked door? Their future stolen by a single hateful word? This story is not just theirs. It's ours. Because what the Johnson family showed us is that resilience isn't just survival. It's standing tall, speaking truth, and refusing to disappear. The world may try to deny you a home, a job, or dignity. But history proves, when you fight with courage, when you know your rights, when you refuse to bow, the walls will crack. And one day, those walls will fall. The gavel slammed. The courtroom erupted. And for a moment, the Johnson family believed the nightmare was over. But what happens after the verdict? What happens when the world knows the truth? But your enemy refuses to fade quietly into the shadows? Because let me tell you, the fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. At first, the victory felt sweet. Marcus carried his daughter across the threshold of their new apartment, smiling for the first time in weeks. Tasha decorated the living room with photos of family. Candles lit, prayers whispered. The children laughed again, their voices echoing against fresh painted walls. But outside those walls, the world was watching. Neighbors stared longer than usual. Whispers followed them down hallways. And mail started arriving late, or not at all. The message was clear. You may have won in court, but you are not welcome here. Marcus felt it in his bones. He had taken a stand. But standing tall came with a price. At work, supervisors suddenly questioned his performance. Friends grew distant, worried about being dragged into drama. Even the church they once attended side-eyed them for exposing one of their pillars of the community. The Johnsons weren't just fighting a landlord anymore. They were fighting an entire system that thrived in silence. And yet, Tasha reminded Marcus of the words she once told their daughter. We are not guests in this world. We belong here. We fight because we must. But here's the twist, family. The landlord wasn't done. He appealed the case, hiring a high-powered attorney to paint the Johnsons as troublemakers. He claimed Marcus had fabricated the story. He accused Tasha of overreacting. He even tried to weaponize their race against them, suggesting they were playing the victim card. The same man who prayed in church, who smiled while shaking hands, was now waging a war of lies, determined to crush the family who dared expose him. And when the appeal made headlines, the Johnsons realized something chilling. They weren't just in a legal battle anymore. They were on trial in the court of public opinion. But here's where the story shifts. Because while some turned away, others stepped forward. Civil rights activists rallied behind the Johnsons. Former tenants of the landlord came forward with their own stories. And soon, local news stations started digging deeper, revealing a pattern of discrimination stretching back decades. The man who once hid behind scripture and reputation, now exposed on every screen. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, chanting for justice, holding signs that read, "Homes, not hate." And this time, the Johnsons weren't standing alone. But let's pause here, because while the landlord's empire began to crumble, one question still lingered. Would he finally be held accountable? Or would money and connections save him again? The Johnsons had won a battle, but the war for dignity, equality, and belonging? Still raging. And as Marcus tucked his children into bed that night, he whispered words not just for them, but for every family still standing outside a locked door, waiting for justice to answer. We will not be erased. Family, let this sink in. This story isn't just about apartments, landlords, or courtrooms. It's about dignity. It's about refusing to accept the crumbs of tolerance when you deserve the fullness of equality. The Johnsons showed us that resilience is contagious. And when one family stands up, others find the courage to rise with them. Now, if you felt this story, don't just sit with it. Share it. Speak on it. Because silence is how injustice survives. And if you want more stories like this, where truth meets courage, where ordinary people face extraordinary battles, hit that like button. Drop a comment with your thoughts. And make sure you subscribe. Because trust me, this fight isn't over.